Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Intuition. This is one of them innate instincts that all of us have, but very few of us have been able to hone to get it to work for us. The question is, what is intuition? It may be one of them senses where you might find yourself, for instance, unemployed, but all of a sudden 2 job offers come in at the same time, and you question which one would be the right opportunity, let's say with all things being equal. How do you tune into the fact that you can actually make a clear decision that's best for you? Or how about that instinct you have where you know something just doesn't feel right, but you don't go with it anyway, and you realize that the outcome is just exactly what you felt was going to happen, and you wished you had paid attention to that gut feeling? On the program today, we're going to be joined with teacher, author, and speaker on intuition, who has taught hundreds of people around the world intuition development. As she professes, it is possible to make intuition happen when we want it to, and to develop our intuition to be reliable and consistent. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest and author of the book, Intuition on Demand. It's a step-by-step guide to powerful intuition you can trust. Lisa Kay, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Oh, thank you for having me, Daniel. I'm really excited to talk to you about this today.
Well, see, this is what I was wondering about. What did your intuition tell you about this show today?
What did my intuition told me that you reach a very wonderfully broad audience, that that basically your message is to go out and help people in all different areas of their lives. But I think that's kind of the feeling that I get from your show.
Now, let's talk about how you came to develop intuition. We all have this, as you talk about in your book, but, you know, some of us, as we have that instinct, and we think, you know, my gut instinct, I followed it, and this turned out this way. I wonder if there's a way that I could actually channel and focus this where I could have more consistency to get the messages where it just doesn't happen once in a while. What's going on there?
Well, you know, what I've discovered through doing a lot of research, and I started out actually not feeling I was very intuitive at all, and that's what spurred me on to wanting to learn how to develop it, because I always thought it was the coolest thing. You know, if you can know the best decision to make, the best road to take, which job should I choose, and have your intuition be there to help you make the better decision. Gosh, if I could learn how to do that, wouldn't that be exciting? And they say everybody can do it. Everybody can develop their intuition. So I took it upon myself to go out and really try. So I studied it, and this is the kind of person I am. I love to study all kinds of things to know how the world works, science, and I studied engineering, and psychology and psychobiology, and I studied first the science route into intuition, and it went so far, and then I studied more in terms of the metaphysical side of how this all works and put all the pieces together. And when I did that, I found, wow, intuition isn't, it's not all that woo. It's actually a way that we can tap into our gut feel, our gut instinct that is really part of our biology, and works very much with the way our mind, our brain works. And from that, I was able to teach myself, and I became very, very good at it, to the point where it helped me in my life. It actually saved my life, and it got me, and I can tell you that story if you'd like to hear it, on how it saved my life. Basically, I had the flu, and but I also had heart problems with it, and my heart would race, and I was a little short of breath, and I didn't understand that, so I actually went to the hospital, the ER room, to find out, because I was having these bouts of it, and it was scary, and they couldn't diagnose it. They said, oh well, you have bacteria in your blood, but take some antibiotics and you'll be fine, and it didn't work. So after this happened over and over and over again, and my going back to the hospital and having shortness of breath and not being able to figure out what it is, they said the same thing. You're just take your pills and you'll be all right. And they sent me home, and I knew at this point it wasn't right. So I turned to my intuition, and my intuition said it's very serious, but you'll be okay if you get help. And so this was over the weekend, and I couldn't get help, and it got to the point where I could barely stand up. So my intuition guided me to grab a book off the shelf, and it was a book on pediatricians, which I thought was odd, but I read it anyway, following my intuition. And the word pediatrician kept coming up over and over and over again. And I thought, oh, you know what? My pediatrician is a friend, and he lives down the street. Maybe he could help me. So I picked up the phone to call him, and my intuition said, leave a detailed message. He'll be back later. And he didn't answer the phone, so I left a detailed message. And he calls back and he says, I know exactly what you need to do. You need to see a specialist. I know someone who will see you right away. Go see him. So I went to this infectious disease specialist, and he found out that I had a heart infection, and he put me in the hospital. So, and then he gave me intravenous antibiotics, which basically saved my life because I was going into sepsis, and all the other doctors hadn't diagnosed it, hadn't caught it. So had I not used my intuition to get immediate help right away, I don't know that I would have survived that. So my intuition at that point, because I had developed it to a high skill level, it saved my life. And after that, I decided, you know what, let me go out and see if I can help other people do the same thing. I taught myself. Let me see if I can teach others, because they could use it to help their lives.
You know, you say something I think is so pertinent for our listeners to understand here, and that is intuition is an ability that's within all of us. I think all of us have had those experiences, just like what you're describing, maybe not necessarily close to a life-threatening one, but one where your gut feeling tells you something and you go with it or you don't. But either way, the outcome brings you something that you scratch your head and say, well, gee whiz, there was something going on there where somehow I knew this.
Yeah.
And there it is. But the question then becomes, is this just something that happens once in a while, you start thinking. But as you said, no, let's take a look at this. It's like being born with muscles or being, born with something that you need to exercise more consistently to get it to work well. And the question, I guess, would be why people tend to think that this isn't something that you can really build on to build strength in, but it's just something that should happen once in a while. It really leaves people with a lot of questions, I think.
Yeah, and I can understand that. And I think it's because most people don't develop it. It's like never learning how to read, so that you don't know that you can do that. And, if you didn't know how to read and you saw someone reading some, scribbles on the wall or something and being able to get a message from that, then you would think, gosh, that's weird. That doesn't, it doesn't seem doable. And I think it's the same thing with your gut instinct and your intuition. It happens to us once in a while, but we generally don't pay attention to it, and we don't try to do anything with it. We don't try to develop it. But then when you actually are able to develop it, like you said, like a muscle, or learning how to play tennis or learning how to swim, you can get better and better at it and actually use that skill and use it for what you want and on the things that you want, and it works. And I think people who are sensitive to their intuitive side tend to get their intuition, their intuitive messages more easily. But those who are not, like me, I wasn't very intuitive. I learned how to listen. I learned what intuition, the characteristics of intuition, which is interesting because, and this is why I think most people don't know much about it. Intuition speaks in its own language. And what is that language? It's the language of symbols, and which is very interesting because it's actually the language of the processing in your right hemisphere. That's how your right hemisphere thinks. It thinks in images, in symbols, and signs, and pieces. It also thinks in abstract concepts, sort of big picture ideas. And that's how intuition comes to us. It's sort of, we have, we might get a feeling of anger, and that could be a symbol, or perhaps we hear just a word, and our intuition really doesn't have very many words. It has one word or two. It's not verbose. And so when you're used to getting these messages, your intuition through these characteristics, then you know how to listen to it. Otherwise, it seems like, well, I don't believe it exists because it doesn't talk to us the way we're used to talking to other people.
Yeah, there's the key, too, is that I think sometimes, as you were talking about in your book, or most of the time, that we tend to put our ego into the driver's seat. And we don't push that linear thinking, that right side or left side of the brain, if you will, the ego, and say, no, hold on a minute. Let's go ahead and try a different driver for a change. Now, again, that's a different exercise. It's be like you may be a right-handed writer for most of your life, and you think, well, I'm going to shift gears and try the left hand. It's not going to happen very easily, and it was funny, I was watching a TED Talks just a few nights ago, and they were talking about, or the speaker was talking about, why we have difficulty learning new things. He says, because there is a particular threshold. He says, now, you can learn anything within the course of 20 hours, and he says, this means anything, but that there is this particular threshold you get because the brain is trying to rewire itself to this new way of doing something. So years ago, I had actually done a wonderful segment with a psychologist from the East Coast, and in her book she was talking about the areas of the brain and how they work and what they do. And one thing that was really astounding to discover was that the idea of habit is the way a brain functions for efficiency. Now, when you think about this for just a minute, you realize how much the brain has to do just for basic automatic body functions, breathing, circulation, heartbeat, and things like that. So what it tries to do to conserve energy is once it ingrains a particular habit, then it throws it on autopilot. So I like to move this kind of idea here with people, for instance, who think, well, I would like to, let's say, earn more money. That always seems to be one of those things I'm sure that you've encountered in your classes.
Sure.
And they say, to earn more money, you've got to change the habit, the way that you do things. For things to change, you have to change. And what happens is people will find this difficult perhaps in the first week or 2 weeks, but if they stick with it, it gets easier because what's happening is your brain's process is rewiring itself to a whole new set of habits that you need to develop to move in that direction. And when I heard or came to read this, I realized this is why self-help has such a difficult time helping people who seek it, because they don't understand that this is an actual physiological process to a point that they realize if they would stick with it and realize, no, there's not something defective in you. If you're in earnest, and as you say, if you really set your intention and you're clear about it, you can do this. Just get over that little hump, and pretty soon it gets easier, and then you'll come to enjoy it.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about building that habit, and it sort of ties into my intuition technique that I have in the book. It is step by step, and that's key. I think when you want to build a new habit, you have to have steps that you're going to do so that you can do those over and over again and create a habit. And so breaking down intuition and how to use it is bringing it down into steps that are easy to understand and easy to use, and so that you can repeat those steps over and over again. And going through my technique, it's very concrete. It's very easy to understand how you go through each step of triggering your intuition to happen when you want, and then how to be open, what that means, so it's concrete, and I talk about that. And then how intuition talks to you and the characteristics of it, so you can recognize it when it comes up inside of you, and so you can discern and tell whether it's you or your thinking mind, and how to repeat these steps. And as you're gathering information from your intuition, because it talks in pieces, how to put those pieces together so it has meaning. Because intuition, again, it's a new language, like you said, using your left hand versus your right. You're not used to this new language. But as you practice it and you start to recognize the language of your intuition, and I go through the characteristics again. It's there in the book. Then you're going to go, oh, I know when it's talking to me. I know what it sounds like, because you're doing a few things. You've got a technique that you can work with and practice, and that's important, building that habit, and do it over and over again. And then as it starts to produce results for you, then you know, oh, I know when how it worked. I know what it felt like. I know what it sounded like when it was right. I know what those words sounded like in my mind when it popped up. That's my inner voice as opposed to my thinking mind. And so breaking it all down that way, it's easier for people to develop their intuition, because now you've got something concrete and you have something you can practice and work with. And I found the great thing about this technique is that I've found that people have success with it after just one lecture. People have written back to me and said, oh, I tried your technique and it worked today. And so I think what the difference is from maybe the way other people have tried to work with their intuition is that when you go through a technique that's clear and understandable and has steps to it, and then you try it, it's easier for people.
Now, here's something, Lisa, that I think would be really enjoyable to bring up here on the program, and that is when you talk about how your intuition speaks to you. And one way certainly is in dreams. Now, some people might be listening and thinking, well, I don't dream, and I'm going to say, well, that's fine, you don't dream, but I'll tell you what, all of us dream, but dreaming is also an exercise. It's something you have to build strength in. I can quickly say this, that since about the age of 5, I began the process of lucid dreaming, in other words, becoming awake in dreams, okay? But it took me time when I finally set the intention to say, okay, I want to see if I can actually get into my dreams and do things that I want to do rather than, as all of us tend to be, a passive observer where things seem to be happening, and then sometimes you're proactive, but most of the time things are just happening and you're observing it. Now, why I brought that up is because there was a guest we had who talked about waking and sleeping dreams, okay? And this, I believe, is a way, because you do talk about this in the book, about one of the ways that intuition actually speaks to you. For instance, if you're making, you're put to a point where there's a decision that you have to make that could be a very significant decision, whether it's a job change, moving, a relationship, things as that. And he says, there are 3 categories that you need to pay attention to, that he wasn't saying intuition, but that you need to pay attention, that the message is coming and it's saying you need to pay attention here. And this could be an awaking state or a sleeping state. A, it's something that shocks you. In other words, there it is. It's, wow, I didn't expect that. B, there's consistency. In other words, it repeats itself. Just like you were talking about, here this idea of this pediatrician kept popping up, see? And then the third thing is it's out of the ordinary. It's something strange that you're not used to experiencing before, And that's when you know whether it's a waking dream or a sleeping dream, as he's saying. That's when you know it's a message that I would have to say would be an intuitive message. So what I'd like to do is go over the 5 steps that you talk about how you can turn on your intuition permanently, okay? And I know the first one is, as we're talking about right here, pay attention to your intuition, okay? So let's talk about that first step there.
Right. So it sounds like you're talking about the actual technique. Is that what you're referring
Absolutely.
to?
Yes.
Okay. So the first step is you want to make your intuition happen when you want to, right? And people oftentimes, if
so
you've studied,
intention we're talking about, correct?
Right, and exactly, and the way you do it actually is you have to trigger it, and the way you trigger it is with a question. And when you ask your intuition a question, it will always answer you. Now you have to understand that while your intuition is working in one side of your brain, it's good to address it as if it's not you, because you basically have 2 brains in your head. You've got the thinking mind, what I call, and the intuitive mind. And the thinking mind is the one that we're very familiar with. It's our brain chatter, it's our logic, it's our judgment, It's our figuring things out.
Our rationalizations, would that be a good one?
Exactly. Yes, rationalization, deduction, and that's the one we're familiar with. The intuitive mind is one that we're not as familiar with, but it does talk to us, and it's a little quieter, and it also talks in the characteristics that I explained earlier, symbols, a word at a time, or two words. And so what you can do is you use your thinking mind, which we're all used to, and you address your intuition mind by asking it a question. The good thing about doing this is that when you're asking your intuition as if it's not you, as if it's outside of you, another person, so to speak, your thinking mind will be a little less likely to answer, because we tend to answer ourselves. We tend to answer our own questions, right? So that's why I want to have people have a view of, let me ask my intuition a question and throw it out there. So that's step one, ask a question. The second step is to be open. And so what is that? Well, it's not sitting there and meditating. It's what I use this analogy. It's the same as when you ask someone a question, where's the bathroom? So it's not about where the bathroom is. It's the state you're in when you ask it. Now, most of us have asked that question because you're in a place you've never been and you need to go. So you ask, where's the bathroom? And when you wait for the answer, you're open. You're not second-guessing. Oh, I know what they're going to say. They're going to tell me it's down the hall on the left. You're just open and you're waiting for them to tell you where it is. That's the state you have to be in when you ask your intuition a question. So that's the second step, be open. So you throw it out there. The third step is to collect the pieces that are coming to you. And so what do I mean by that? That's where you need to know the intuition characteristics. You might get a word or two. It's not going to be a lot of words. Remember that. And that's going to come up in your mind. It's going to be what they call your inner voice. And it might sound like you, but it's short. It might be a flash of an image in your mind. It might be a feeling that you get, and the feeling could be emotional or physical. And it'll come quickly. Now, it's only going to be a piece. So you hang on to that piece. It might be the color red. And then what you do is the fourth step is D. You do it again. So you're going to do A, B, C, which is the ask is A, B is be open, C is to collect, and D is to do it again. So those are the four steps. And so what you're going to do is you're going to go back and ask again, oh, you gave me the color red. Why did you give me the color red, intuition? And you might hear the word anger. And so now you've got another piece. And then you might say, okay, red and anger, what does that have to do with the question I asked? And you ask your intuition that. And you might get, say, a name, Bob, right? So now you have pieces that start to form a picture. Bob, anger. And so, it can be the message is there's some anger around Bob. Maybe Bob's angry at you. Or maybe he's just angry in general.
Maybe Bob knows that you've been out with his girlfriend.
There you go. And he's really mad.
Intuitively, you might want to step away from that relationship.
Exactly.
Bob is angry.
Exactly. So that's so you keep doing that, and you start. And this is how people who are highly intuitive get a lot of information, because they're going back and they're asking, and they're as the piece. It's sort of like when you're going, like the fog. You're going through the fog and in the evening, and then you start to see bits and pieces of something out there, and you see maybe a mast and then a flag, and then you see a ship's bow, and you go, oh, it's a ship, right? You start to get little pieces, and it forms the answer, that forms the message your intuition's giving you. So those are the four steps. Ask, be open, collect the pieces, and do it, and do the whole series again. And the fifth step is to practice. Now that's the key to knowing whether your intuition is talking to you or not. Because as you practice this, like anything else, just like you were talking earlier, Daniel, about as you get better and better at it, you're going to know, oh, I know when my intuition has been telling me something, because when I was practicing, I would see an image pop up. And I'll give you an example. I tell everybody to do this, practice all the time, find opportunities to do it. And I was visiting a doctor who I'd been seeing periodically, and I knew the last time I had visited him, he was having some back trouble. And so I thought, oh, I wonder how he's doing. I know, I'll ask my intuition, and then I could validate it later when he comes in. So the first thing that popped up in my head was a quick flash. It was a flash of him hunched over on crutches, wearing a striped white and green shirt. And I immediately thought, oh my gosh, that's terrible. Don't think like that. And I dismissed it. And then I went into my whole process of, getting my intuition to work and being open and collecting pieces. And I got some other information, which turned out to be right. But and then I waited, and he came in about a few minutes later, and he opened the door, and he was hunched over on crutches, wearing a white and green striped shirt. And I was shocked. I was like, oh my gosh.
There's that dream thing I was talking about, remember?
Exactly.
It shocks you, it's repetitive, or it's out of the ordinary. So,
right,
anyway.
and it was out of the ordinary. Well, that was it. It was out of the ordinary. I didn't expect it. But what I learned from practicing it was that, my intuition shows me flashes of images so quick, and they come very quickly, before I even, get into my kind of setup to tune into my intuition. It comes very quickly. Right after, I could use my intuition to see how he's doing. Flash. Right? And I remembered how the image came to me in my mind. So that way I knew, okay, so now when I use my intuition, I have to be very aware right away of what I'm feeling, what's popping up inside of me. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. In fact, you also gave an example in your book about a stairwell encounter. And that seemed to be more kind of just
the dream.
I could be off, but more like a remote viewing experience. But anyway.
That was, and let's talk a little bit, you're talking about dreams, and I wanted to touch on that a bit. One of the reasons why, and I get a lot of people, when I go speak or I have students come for the first time, they're always saying, oh, I get all my intuition through my dreams. And, why is that? And the reason for that is when we go to sleep, our thinking mind is quieter, but our intuitive mind is still talking to us, and we can hear it, we can experience it more easily because we're asleep. So basically, we're not conscious.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're also not in a conscious state of action, where you're making conscious decisions. I need to go and get something.
Exactly.
When you're asleep, that kind of goes to the wayside, and that's where what they would call the super unconscious actually comes in. So
exactly, and you're just the observer, right, in your dreams most of the time, and which is good. That's the way you should be. Your thinking mind is observing now rather than trying to think, and now you can observe what your intuitive mind is telling you, and that's what happened to me. I was, and this was when I was in my 20s, and I was out for dinner with some friends, and the friends I were with, it was a couple, and it was a guy and a girl, and basically we went. It was nothing unusual. We went out to dinner, we had pizza, and then we went home, and I was so tired that it was the kind of tired where the minute your head hits the pillow, you're out. And so what happened was I started to fall asleep, and then I started to dream. And I was dreaming about my friend, and he was. I kept seeing him, and we were in a stairwell, and he was standing 2 steps above me, and he was crying, and he was pleading with me. And I couldn't hear what his words were, but I could see his mouth moving. But I had a feeling inside, and this is all in the dream, that he wanted me to do something, but I just couldn't do it. And he kept asking, and I just couldn't do it. But I felt so bad, and that he was hurting. And then I wake up from the dream, and then oh gosh, I want to go back. So I try to go back to sleep again, and I'd fall asleep, and the dream would happen again, like you said, repetitive, and I'd see the same thing, and I thought, that's odd, and they'd try to go to sleep again, and then the phone rang, and I jumped out of bed, and I just picked it up, and I said yes, because and it happened to be a mutual friend of ours, and this mutual friend said that he had gotten a phone call from the girl and Sandy, and she said that she was very worried about Steve, her boyfriend, because who I was dreaming about, because she had just broken up with him, and he was very distraught, and he was saying things that scared her, and that he wanted to do harm to himself, so didn't know what to do. And so finally I was telling our mutual friend, let's get him some help, and which we did, and so everything turned out okay. But the next day I went and was talking to Sandy, and she told us about this, and I was starting to think about my dream, and I was like, that's kind of weird. And I asked her, I said, when he told you that, when you told him you were breaking up, and where were you? And she said that they were in a stairwell. And I said, you were. I said, so was the stairwell gray walls with a gray railing? And she said, yes. And I said, was he standing like 2 steps above you when you were talking, when you were? And she said, yes. Oh my gosh, how did you know that? I said, well, I was dreaming about it. I dreamt it. And then I realized that I was seeing the scene. I was seeing him through her eyes at the time that they were having this conversation, and that he was pleading with her to stay with him, and pleading. And she said, I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't say yes anymore. We've always broken up and gotten back together, and I just had to say no. And so I was actually experiencing it through her eyes. So that was my first really shocking.
Yeah,
that shocking
it also raises to me a very fascinating question for many of us: is where does this come from? That is, and I couldn't help when you were talking about that. And briefly, I remember something about remote viewing, and here's I'd like to kind of throw a movie in here, and it's a movie by the title of Suspect Zero. And it actually stars, I'm trying to remember his name. He starred in the movie Gone, the Academy Award winner. It'll come to me in a minute. But Ben Kingsley, exactly. There you go, and Aaron Eckhart. And Aaron Eckhart plays an FBI agent that's tracking down what seems to be this guy who is giving clues about these killings, okay? But yet, if they don't get there fast enough, then basically Ben Kingsley's character takes care of business. But there's actually a bigger fish that he's trying to lead him to, where you keep seeing children disappearing. Anyway, that's the premise of the story. But what had happened in the movie is that Ben Kingsley was actually trained to become a remote viewer, but he couldn't turn it off. Nobody trained these people to turn this thing off. And so it goes back to the question, though, that's remote viewing and a side note, but I thought that would be an interesting thing for people to see. But the idea is, where does this information come from? Like you said, through her eyes, you're in a stairwell, for instance, and this came to you, and it begs the question, where does this come from?
Well, it's, the definition of intuition is knowing without knowing how you know it. If you extend
that's the straight, unconfusing answer there. But hey, it just comes to go with it now.
We don't know, and,
right.
and that's the thing. And people do ask that all the time, and I like to feel that is perhaps the way, as the stories are told, that's how people get their inspiration. That's how they get information. We don't know. There are a lot of things that we don't know. That's part of why I studied science. Actually, that's a lot of why I studied science, because I wanted to know. I wanted to know, how does the world work? How do we, why do things happen? Why do we do things the way we do it? And I found that science was able to explain a lot of things, and that it was not able to explain other things. And so and part of that is also because we are limited by first of all our five senses. We can only experience what our five senses tell us, and also understand things that we experience in the physical world. But which is through our five senses. But our five senses can't pick up everything. We can't see UV light, right? And so on. And so what is out there that we can't experience, but is there and does exist. So I like to be open about it. It's a broad spectrum. It could be we're getting information from, quote, universal consciousness, or we could also say we're getting it from the other 90% of our brain that we don't use, and so who knows? We don't really know.
So now this was step one, folks, of how we can develop our intuition permanently, and the first one was to pay attention to your intuition. I know we gave you a long answer there, but that was actually a good one, I thought. So let's go ahead and go to step two, and this is where you deliberately use your intuition when making decisions. And I thought this is really one where I think a lot of us have trouble getting over that hump. And another movie comes to mind is, you remember the classic Field of Dreams starring Kevin Costner.
Mm-hmm.
This is for people who may not be familiar. He's a guy that lives out on a farm, and he gets this voice that says, when you build it, they will come. And as you were saying earlier, sometimes your intuition comes to you in bits and pieces, whereas the first bit for him was just this voice that came to him that suggested for him to do this. But it took time, but then it came to a big decision where he realizes, I've got to tear down my corn crop and build a baseball field. Now, take a look at that big decision there. That's really out there kind of in left field, for lack of a better word. Mm-hmm. How do you know that's a good direction to go, no matter how crazy it seems?
Well, sometimes you don't know, right? And I think that intuition gives you guidance. So it might say, go talk to that person over there. Or stop now and go for a walk, and you don't know what the next step is, but you have to take the step. You have to follow it to find out where it's going to lead. So it gives you some guidance, and that's kind of the nice thing, is I've discovered that when you follow it, it's often very you get nice surprises. It's like, oh
right.
Wow, I found this really cool restaurant here. Or that person led me to a publisher that helped publish my book. In fact, that's what happened with me. I have my own podcast, and I was listening to someone else's podcast, and there was a guest on there, and I loved the guest. He was wonderful, but the interviewer wasn't asking the questions that I wanted to ask. So I thought, I'm going to have him on my podcast.
That's the way it works.
Because he's really awesome. He's so cool, and so I took the chance and called him up, and he said, "Sure, I'll be on your show," which surprised me. And so I got him on the show, and we got to get to know each other, and it turned out that he has a connection with a publisher, and that's that's how things led from one to another, and through that I was able to get my book published. So you just never know where things are going to lead.
And what's really cool about what you're saying here, Lisa, is I think a lot of us get stuck in ruts because we consciously make decisions that seem to be linear and from the rational, egotistical mind. I think that's why we get in those ruts where, and you're in a rut when life just not only doesn't surprise you anymore, but you almost feel like you don't even look forward to the next day at times. And this is where you kind of follow that flow, as you're saying, and say, why don't you just see what happens around that corner and become surprised again? Let the mystery of life unravel itself, and as you're saying, it rewards you in ways that you can't even imagine. I think that's a great place to live from.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that's how synchronicities work. I think you have to give it a chance to work with it. And what does that mean? Well, your intuition works with the synchronicities. It's sort of, one thing leads to another, but you have to know what that thing is to take, the direction to go in, such that the synchronicities can occur. So, and bring great stuff.
Now, as we covered the 2 steps here, we're going to move on to a 3rd step, which is to develop your intuition by going further. And I like this one because this is where you can open up to a broad range, as you said, to things that will come into your life that'll take you in directions that could be very surprising.
Yes. You have to, I think you need to take the step to go further because, once if you don't take steps and put things in place, which is finding out more, learning techniques and methods, that, it's particularly with your intuition, that you're not going to be able to experience anything. You have to give the universe an opportunity to have something to build on. And so that is sort of the next step that makes it a little more concrete. So if you go and take a class or you read a book or you learn some techniques and you actually do it and try it, then then it's actually going to develop even more for you.
As you say, a strong intuition is a developed skill. We can't say
absolutely.
that enough here. It's a developed skill. You have it, yes, but just like walking, you've got to learn to develop it before you can run and be stronger at it, and so forth. And I think that's so important here because it leads to the next step that you talk about. This is about developing your intuition permanently. So it's a regular practice, and I like this because then it becomes automatic. And to give you an idea here, I think more when you begin paying attention to your thoughts, as you mentioned earlier about that chattering mind that's going on, you realize that a lot of times you make decisions through a filtered lens. You might have an attitude that somebody coming along is doing this, and you think, well, what do I do next? Well, you might have an attitude with that circumstance based on a past experience, for instance. So you make a rational decision. And then if you can pay attention, though, to your thinking in that moment, what's coming to my mind here, and realize this is how I'm about to make this decision, you realize, okay, that doesn't work here because it's not based on the reality of this moment. We always hear about being in the moment. Well, this is a way to practice this. I noticed, for instance, years ago when I started paying attention to my thoughts, pretty soon I felt calmer and calmer and calmer. I was like, what's that thought doing in there? That isn't what's happening right now. You begin to question those thoughts as they occur because they become automatic. The brain is an automatic creature because it's conserving energy. It's like that for everybody. So, number 4, practice makes clarity, and I thought that was an interesting way to kind of bring that particular step in.
Yes, and so what's important is I think we were talking earlier about, creating that habit, and you're creating sort of an intuitive life but you have to build that into your life because you're shifting from the thinking all the time to being aware of your intuition more often. And so you have to practice and you have to remember to use it. And, most of us start out thinking, well, if I could really hone my intuition, then that's great. Then I could pick the best job. I can find my soulmate. I can, and those are big life-changing decisions. But you don't have to use your intuition on those big life decisions. You can use it in everything you do. And when you do that, then it's going to be easier for you when you have to use it for the big things. So, if you needed to, so it's just like learning how to drive. You learn how to drive to the mailbox. You learn how to drive, then you graduate to going across town or going to the grocery store. And then eventually, when you have to, if you need to drive to another state, go down the highway. Or say you need to get somewhere, it's an emergency. Now you can use your skill to drive, and for getting where you need to get to in a hurry. The same thing with your intuition. You have to learn how to use it in everything you do. And you can use it when you're making decisions, whether it's deciding what restaurant to pick, where to go for vacation, or what job to pick. it's easier when you're using it on simple things and then when it works out for you, then, and I like to talk about intuition exercises, and one is you can use your intuition to predict, say, when you're going to get called in if you're waiting online or you're waiting to go in to see the doctor, right? We never know when we're going to go in, but you can ask your intuition, is it going to be within the next 20 minutes? Or is it going to be...
Or it could be like you. You were picked last when you wanted to be first.
Yes, exactly. That was... that was another one. And that was a good example. I was waiting to... This was an event, and they were picking people to go in a particular order to be. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but to be. I don't know. It was a ceremony to So each of us would go out and be and do the ceremony. And there was one woman who was creating the lineup. And I thought, while I'm waiting for her to decide, I will see if I can use my intuition to determine when I'll go. And so I asked my intuition, use the technique, ask the question, okay, when am I going to go up? Be open. And so I just waited, where's the bathroom? And I got that the piece that I got was first. Oh, I'm going to be first. Cool. All right. And, of course, me being the doubter, I said, well, I'm going to check my intuition again. Am I really going to be first? I'll ask again. So when am I going to go up? And this time I got last. I asked again, and I got last again. And I was like, I guess I'm going to be last. So it turned out that I was last. I was last to go up for the ceremony. And I got that. That's cool. But I had to validate it, because when you do an exercise, it was validated because I knew it was last, but I also wanted to know a little more. So I was talking to the woman who was picking the lineup, and I said, I knew you were going to pick me last. And she goes, yeah, you're very intuitive. She says, but actually, I was going to pick you first, and I changed my mind.
Wow.
And I decided to make you last because she said the first person and the last person are very honored places. So it was very nice of her to do that. But that validated that, hey, I was getting the information. So you got to practice all the time. Practice.
Now, the fifth step to tuning into or getting your intuition to work permanently, and I really like this one, especially as you were talking about in your book, ways that you can do this, is staying tuned in. And you suggest that this is what spirituality is for. And one of the things that came to mind that you talk about was the idea of also writing. And it reminded me of, for instance, the teachings of Jesus, where he was saying all of us can actually manifest miracles. Here's how you do it. Okay? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting how we've decided to, at least, not all of us, but we take a position, well, Jesus was the Messiah. He could do that, but I can't. But he clearly states in the Bible, look, all things I do, you can do, and greater. In other words, he's saying if you just follow these things here, you can do the same thing or even better. But he's saying this is how you manifest miracles. And I actually had asked a guest one time, what exactly is a miracle? And he says, a miracle is just basically something you haven't had experience with before. And I thought, well, that's simple enough. But here's what it says. This was years ago where there was somebody who was in the ministry was telling me, here's what it is. Okay, Jesus says the first thing you do is you feel it in your heart. Okay? And then the next thing you do is you speak it. Okay, now if you pay attention to people, for instance, who talk about goal setting, one of the big things they talk about, consistency, is that you write your goal down. And I always wondered about what the power of that really is. The power is that you're taking from a tremendously abundant universe, as you were talking about earlier. I mean, we all have access to this unlimited abundance, but you're taking that from the metaphysical world. When you write it down, now you're giving it physical life. Now it's just a matter of time and birthing, and as you say, being in practice, keeping that intention solid on it. You're giving birth to this. Sometimes this takes a little time. As you said, intuition comes in pieces. And sometimes when you make those decisions, it may not have the kind of outcome that seems positive or the way you thought it would be. but you might want to stick with it anyway because it's going to lead you to the direction that, let's say, could be for your highest spiritual good. So staying tuned in is this final practice here. What are your thoughts on that as we wrap up the show here?
Well, a lot of people want to be tuned into their intuition so that they can feel calmer, feel centered, feel like they're always supported. And that's the way it should be. And when you have your intuition honed and you have it at your command, then you can feel you have something to rely on that's greater than you. Because, again, we don't know where the information is coming from. I like to think that it might be coming from our higher selves or, the universe or creator, whatever you might want to call it. And just as you said, if Jesus said that we can, be supported in that way and get the information we need, then this is the way to do it. And when you have that, then all the weight's off your shoulders because now you're co-creating. Now you're working with the universe. Now you're working with something bigger and better than you are to help you move through life. You don't have the anxiety anymore that, oh, did I make the right decision? Or what's going to happen next? I have to make sure nothing bad happens. Well, now you've got the support because you're connected to a greater being or a greater consciousness that's giving you the guidance on where you should go. And so maybe when you take that first step that you were guided to go to, okay, let me take that step and see where it happens. I have the faith that goodness is going to come from it because I know I'm getting the support and information from a good place.
And as I was talking about, too, earlier there, was the idea that sometimes we'll make a decision based on an intuitive message, and it may not have the outcome or it feels like a negative outcome. Well, let's just say that negative outcome happens. Here's an easy question you can ask yourself in that moment. What possible good is going to come from this? And it really becomes amazing because now you're setting a whole new habit about how you look at adversity. Sometimes
that's
adversity
true.
is just going to happen because that's a whole new muscle that perhaps your universe is saying, you need to start exercising because I've got bigger things planned here for you, pal.
Right. And I like to think that everything happens for a reason and that, maybe it sent you on a path that you didn't expect and maybe you didn't like it, but there's a reason for it. Maybe you're disappointed something didn't happen. I believe, it wasn't meant to happen because something better is coming along. Absolutely.
I remember, I think it was Marianne Williamson once said something about, you took that little itty-bitty part on Hill Street Blues, and here I am, the universe. I kept trying to give you something bigger, but you just didn't want to get out of that little part. But when you decide to do that, just let me know, and we'll get you that bigger thing that you were intended to have in the first place. But that takes work, no doubt about that. Lisa, it's been a great pleasure to have you here on the program today. First of all, I'd like you to go ahead and give out your website because there people can find out how they can get 16 free intuition exercise through a free ebook. So that's a nice little incentive there. But what is your website? People can find out more.
Well, the easiest one is intuitionondemandbook.com. And that goes to my website and the book page where you can buy the book. But also right there you'll be able to see how you can sign up for my newsletter and get 16 free intuition exercises, which are very good honed exercises that you can practice on your own. So that's intuitionondemandbook.com. Get everything all about me and freebies. It's all out there. So
and I guess they can find you on YouTube as well?
Yes. And again, if you go to my website, the links are there for YouTube. A lot of fun videos there with intuition tips. I've got a bunch of articles on intuition and how to lead a better life, and that's
and a fun
there
blog too. I've got to add that. There's some really great little things you've got going on in there as well.
Thanks, and we try to keep that going, and because that's what it's all about: getting back to that point where you're centered, use your intuition to lead a better life, and then how to expand that and have a better life.
and especially a nice, fun, mysterious one that isn't so predictable, but sure is a lot of fun because you realize you're playing again and you're developing a lot more, and you're not in that rut that sometimes we tend to get into. Lisa, thank you so much again for joining us here on the program today. What a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in to us. You can also develop further intuition by tapping into Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter to keep up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.